When does love turn into regret? When does a promise become just a memory? She stood there, frozen as he spoke, cold, final, irreversible. The boy who once dreamed of forever with her was gone. No hesitation, no second glance. Just a quiet goodbye that shattered everything. Years would pass, but some goodbyes have a way of returning. Some heartbreaks never truly heal. And when fate brings them back together, will it be too late? Stay. This story is just beginning. Ivy Quinn never believed in fairy tales, but if she had, Knox Wilder would have been the boy who made her reconsider. They met in the hallways of Riverside High, where she was the quiet girl who loved books, and he was the golden boy of the football team, always surrounded by a crowd. Their worlds were different, but somehow they collided. And when they did, it was electric. Knox was more than just a star athlete. He had ambition, dreams that stretched far beyond the small town of Riverside, Oregon. Ivy was drawn to that fire in him, and he, in turn, was mesmerized by her quiet strength, the way she saw the world through hopeful eyes. Together, they made promises that felt unbreakable. "One day, we'll leave this town," Knox whispered one summer night, their fingers intertwined as they lay under the stars. "Move to the city, get a tiny apartment, and figure it all out together," Ivy added, smiling. "You and me. Always." It was foolish, maybe. Naive. But wasn't that what love was supposed to be at 17? Then, things changed. After graduation, Knox got accepted into a prestigious university, his dream, their dream. But instead of bringing them closer, it pulled them apart. He became distant. Texts that once arrived in seconds took hours, then days. Dates were postponed, then forgotten. Excuses piled up like autumn leaves, crisp and fleeting. Ivy felt it slipping, but she held on, until the day he let go. It was a crisp fall afternoon, the kind where the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and nostalgia. They met at their favorite park, but the moment she saw him, she knew. His eyes, once warm and full of fire, were cold. "This isn't working anymore," Knox said, his voice steady, practiced. "Knox, we can." "No, Ivy," he cut her off. "I need to focus on my future. This? Us? It's holding me back." Silence. Then, the slow, agonizing realization that this wasn't just a rough patch. This was the end. Ivy wanted to scream, to fight for what they had. But instead, she did the one thing she never thought she'd do. She let him go. As he walked away without looking back, something inside her shattered. A promise, a future, a love that was supposed to last, gone with the autumn wind. But heartbreak has a way of coming back when you least expect it. And for Ivy, the storm was only just beginning. The days after Knox left were a blur. Ivy tried to move forward, to convince herself that heartbreak was just a phase, something she could outrun. But then, the exhaustion came. The nausea. The undeniable, creeping fear that something was wrong. At first, she ignored it. Blamed the stress, the sleepless nights. But when the dizziness became unbearable, when her period was weeks late, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. In the dim glow of the bathroom light, Ivy clutched the pregnancy test, her hands trembling. She didn't want to look. Didn't want to see the result that could change everything. One deep breath. Then another. And then, 2 pink lines. The air left her lungs. Her stomach twisted into knots. No. No, this can't be happening. But it was. Knox was gone. Her future, their future, had crumbled before her eyes. And now, growing inside her, was the one piece of him she could never walk away from. She told them over dinner. The Quinn family had always been about tradition, about pride. Her father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding, his expectations clear. Her mother, Maria, was softer, but no less bound by the weight of appearances. Ivy's hands were cold as she gripped her fork, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Then, the sound of a fork clattering against porcelain. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears already welling in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Richard's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Ivy swallowed hard. "I'll keep the baby." Maria sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking. "Oh my God, Ivy. What have you done?" Her father, however, didn't cry. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he stared at her, his expression unreadable, until finally, he spoke. "You've disgraced this family." Ivy flinched. "Dad, I..." "Shut up." The words cracked like thunder. He shoved his chair back, standing so suddenly the table rattled. His face twisted in disgust. "You're not my daughter anymore. Get out of my house." Maria gasped, shaking her head. "Richard, please, she's just a kid. A stupid kid who's ruined his whole future." Richard spat, turning back to Ivy. His voice was eerily calm now. "Oh, you want to keep that baby? Fine. But you won't do it under this roof." Ivy's breath hitched. "Dad, please." But there was no mercy in his eyes. She packed in silence. Every fold of clothing, every belonging she placed into her bag, felt like another piece of her life being stripped away. She moved mechanically, methodically, as if detaching herself from the pain would make it hurt less. Her mother stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do." Ivy's voice was barely a whisper. "I know." She wanted her mother to fight for her. To tell her father he was wrong, that this wasn't the end of everything. But Maria Quinn had never been strong enough to stand against her husband. So Ivy didn't beg. She simply slung her bag over her shoulder, took one last look at the house she had called home for 18 years, and stepped out into the night. Alone. She had no one to call. No friends who would understand. No family who would take her in. Except. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts. Then, she found the name. Elena Carter. Her grandmother. The woman her father rarely spoke about, the one he deemed reckless and stubborn. Ivy barely knew her, but right now, she was the only hope she had left. She pressed call. It rang once. Twice. Then. "Ivy." Her voice broke. "Grandma. I have nowhere else to go." A pause. Then, steady, unwavering. "There's always a place for you here, my dear." Tears streamed down Ivy's face. For the first time that night, she let herself breathe. The road ahead was uncertain, terrifying. But at least now, she had somewhere to go. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. Pain. It tore through Ivy's body like fire, raw and relentless, as she clutched the hospital bed, her fingers digging into the sheets. She had never known pain like this, blinding, merciless, stretching every nerve in her body to its breaking point. "You're almost there, sweetheart," Elena's voice cut through the chaos, firm yet gentle, her wrinkled hands gripping Ivy's in silent support. One more push. Ivy gasped for air, tears streaking her face. And then. A cry. Sharp. Piercing. The world blurred as Ivy collapsed against the pillows, her entire body trembling. Then, suddenly, something warm and delicate was placed in her arms. A baby. Her baby. Ivy's breath caught, as she looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face nestled against her chest. The baby's skin was soft, her fingers impossibly small as they curled into a fist. But it was the eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, that made Ivy's heart stop. Knox's eyes. A lump formed in her throat. "She's beautiful," Elena whispered, brushing a damp strand of hair from Ivy's forehead. Ivy swallowed hard, tightening her grip on the fragile life in her arms. "Her name is Lily." The name tasted like hope, like something delicate yet unbreakable. Just like her. And in that moment, Ivy made a silent vow, no matter how hard it got, no matter what she had to endure, she would give this child the life she deserved. Even if it meant doing it alone. Motherhood was not beautiful. At least, not in the way people romanticized it. It was exhaustion, so deep it felt like drowning. It was waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of Lily's cries, rocking her for hours until Ivy's arms went numb. It was working double shifts at Rose's diner, pouring coffee for strangers who barely looked at her, counting every dollar and stretching every cent just to keep food on the table. It was sacrifice. "You look dead on your feet, honey," Rosie, the diner's owner, remarked one evening as Ivy wiped down the counter, dark circles etched beneath her eyes. Ivy forced a tired smile. "That's because I am." "Go home," Rosie said, waving her off. "I'll cover for you." Ivy hesitated, she needed the hours. But the thought of holding Lily, of inhaling the soft baby scent of her daughter's hair, made the decision for her. "Thank you." The apartment she shared with Elena was small, barely enough for two, but it was warm. Safe. When Ivy stepped inside, Elena was in the rocking chair, Lily nestled against her chest, sound asleep. "She fought sleep again," Elena murmured, smiling. "Just like her mama used to." Ivy let out a soft laugh, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She knelt beside them, brushing a kiss to Lily's forehead. "I don't know how I would have done this without you, Grandma." Elena cupped Ivy's cheek, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "You're stronger than you think, niece. And you're doing just fine." Maybe. But as Ivy watched her daughter sleep, she couldn't help but wonder, would Lily ever forgive her for the father she would never know? And more terrifyingly, would Ivy ever forgive herself? Knox Wilder had everything he ever wanted, except the one thing that truly mattered. He had climbed the ranks at his prestigious university, earning scholarships, accolades, and a future most people would kill for. He had the connections, the reputation, the offers from top companies before he even graduated. But every night, when the world quieted, he felt the emptiness claw at his chest. For years, he told himself he had made the right choice. That breaking up with Ivy had been necessary, that letting go of love was the price of ambition. But if that was true, then why did he still dream about her? Why did he still hear her laugh in the back of his mind, feel the ghost of her touch whenever the autumn wind brushed against his skin? Knox had spent years chasing success, but no amount of victories could fill the void she left behind. And so, one day, he made a decision. He was going back. Back to Riverside. Back to her. The town hadn't changed much. Same streets, same faces. But everything felt off. Knox had expected resistance, he knew he had burned bridges. But the silence that followed him wherever he went was unsettling. People glanced at him, then looked away. Conversations died when he approached. And when he finally stood at the doorstep of the Quinn house, the air inside felt heavy, suffocating. Richard opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Knox." Knox swallowed hard. "I need to see Ivy." Maria, standing behind her husband, sucked in a sharp breath. She clutched the edge of the kitchen counter like she needed something to hold on to. Richard's jaw tightened. "She's not here." Knox frowned. "When will she be back?" Silence. A beat too long. A sinking feeling spread in Knox's stomach. Where is she? Maria let out a quiet sob, turning away. Richard's voice was cold. She's gone. The words hit Knox like a punch to the gut. Gone? She left years ago. Richard's eyes bore into his. And she doesn't want to be found. Something inside Knox cracked. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He had expected anger, resentment, he deserved it. But this was worse. Because it meant he had truly lost her. Where did she go? Knox's voice was desperate now, a man grasping at the last threads of hope. But Richard only shook his head. Forget about her, Knox. And then, with finality. She forgot about you. Knox didn't believe them. He couldn't. So he searched. He combed through old contacts, asked every mutual friend, went to every place Ivy had ever loved. He drove to nearby towns, searched through records, even considered hiring a private investigator. But it was like she had vanished. No traces. No whispers. Nothing. At first, the desperation fueled him. But as months turned into years, the truth sank in. Maybe she really was gone. Maybe he was too late. And maybe he had no one to blame but himself. Lily Wilder had always been different. Even as a child, she was insatiably curious, the kind of girl who asked why more than she asked how. While other kids played with dolls, she dissected them to understand how their joints moved. While other teenagers obsessed over social media, she buried herself in medical journals, fascinated by the intricate workings of the human body. Ivy never had to push her daughter toward greatness, Lily ran toward it herself. And now, at 26, she was one of the youngest surgical residents at Springfield General Hospital. Smart. Relentless. Unstoppable. She had inherited her mother's resilience, her determination. But what she didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that she had also inherited something else. A pair of striking blue eyes. Eyes that would shatter a man's world the moment he saw them. It started like any other day. Dr. Lily Wilder was preparing for surgery, an elderly woman, Ellen Wilder, admitted for a critical heart condition. The name didn't mean anything to her. Just another patient. Just another procedure. She scrubbed in, focused, professional. But as she entered the operating room, Paul Wilder, Ellen's husband, caught sight of her. And his entire body went rigid. Because staring back at him was the past he thought was long buried. The same piercing blue eyes. The same sharp cheekbones. A face that was hauntingly familiar, yet completely unknown. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Because this wasn't possible. And yet. Doctor, Paul's voice was hoarse, his hands trembling as he stopped her outside the OR. What did you say your name was? Lily frowned, taken aback. Dr. Wilder. The name hit him like a sledgehammer. And? Your parents. Paul's voice was barely a whisper now. My mother is Ivy Quinn, Lily answered, glancing at the clock. Look, sir, I have a surgery to perform. But Paul wasn't listening anymore. Because he knew. He knew. He staggered back, gripping the wall for support, his heart pounding as the pieces clicked into place. His granddaughter had been right in front of him, and he had never even known she existed. And neither had Knox. Paul didn't wait. As soon as the surgery was over and Ellen was stable, he grabbed his phone and called his son. Knox. You need to come to Springfield. Now. Knox groaned on the other end. Dad, what? It's late. Shut up and listen to me. Paul's voice shook. I found her. Silence. Then, barely a breath. Who? Paul's grip tightened on the phone. Ivy. The sound of something shattering echoed through the line. Where? Knox's voice was raw, desperate. Paul swallowed hard. You're not just coming for Ivy, son. He took a shaky breath. You're coming for your daughter. Another pause. Longer this time. When Knox finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My what? Paul's next words changed everything. Knox? You have a daughter. The phone call ended abruptly. And 4 hours later, Knox was already on the road, driving toward a past he thought he had lost, toward a future he never knew existed. The moment Ivy opened the door and saw Knox standing there, her heart stopped. It had been nearly 3 decades since that autumn afternoon when he walked away. And now, he was back, standing on her porch in Springfield, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. But he had no right. Ivy's fingers curled around the door frame, her body tense. Knox looked different, older, sharper, the boyish charm replaced with something heavier. His hair was a little shorter, his jawline more defined, but his eyes, they were the same. Still deep, still blue. And damn them, they still had the power to shake her. Ivy, he breathed. Her grip tightened. No. Knox blinked. No. No, Knox. Her voice was cold, controlled. You don't get to show up here after all these years and act like you still belong in my life. You don't. Pain flashed across his face, but he didn't move. Ivy, please. You left. Her words came fast, sharp. You made your choice. And I made mine. She stepped back, gripping the door, ready to slam it in his face. Wait. Knox's voice cracked. Lily. I just want to see her. Ivy's breath hitched. Lily. He didn't even know her. Hadn't been there when she took her first steps, when she cried through the nights, when she got accepted into medical school. Knox Wilder was nothing but a stranger. And she would not let him waltz back in and disrupt the life she had spent years rebuilding. She doesn't need you. Ivy's voice was steady, unyielding. And neither do I. Then, before he could say another word, she shut the door. And locked it. Knox stood there for a long time after that, staring at the door that had just been slammed in his face. But if Ivy thought that was the end, she didn't know him at all. Because Knox Wilder wasn't leaving. Not this time. Knox didn't push. He wanted to. God, he wanted to demand answers, to break down that damn door and make her listen. But he had learned something over the years. Love wasn't about demanding. It was about proving. So he stayed in Springfield. At first, Lily didn't know what to make of him. She was cautious, guarded, the same way her mother had been. And Knox didn't blame her. But he didn't run. Instead, he showed up. He got a job at a local construction firm, working long hours, proving he wasn't just some man passing through. He didn't beg for Lily's love, he earned it. He supported her from a distance, attended one of her medical seminars without her knowing, left little notes of encouragement in her hospital locker. Slowly, brick by brick, he built something with his daughter. And then, there was Ivy. Knox helped when she needed it, even when she didn't ask. Fixing her grandmother's old fence. Carrying groceries when he saw her struggling. Being there, not because he expected gratitude, but because she had carried the burden alone for too damn long. Ivy fought it. 4 years, she fought it. But one night, she stood on her porch, watching Knox help Elena with a broken light bulb, and something inside her cracked. This wasn't the selfish boy who had once left her behind. This was a man. A man who had changed. And for the first time in 30 years, Ivy let herself wonder. Was it too late to let him in? Ivy felt something shift inside her. She had spent so many years fighting to survive, fighting to be strong, fighting to protect her daughter from the pain she had once endured. And now, as she stood in the airport, watching Lily disappear through the terminal gate, she realized something. She had been fighting ghosts. Knox was no longer the boy who had broken her heart. And she was no longer the girl who had been left behind. She had spent decades telling herself she didn't need him, that she had built a life without him. But the truth was, she was tired of being at war with the past. So when she turned to leave the airport and saw Knox standing there, hands in his pockets, waiting, she didn't walk away. Instead, she met his gaze and finally, after all these years, she let herself ask, what if? They took it slow. No grand declarations, no promises whispered under the stars like when they were young. They talked, really talked, for the first time in years. About Lily. About the years they had lost. About who they had become. And slowly, carefully, they let something grow between them again. It wasn't the reckless love of 17. It wasn't fueled by desperation or blind faith. It was real. Earned. Tested. Unbreakable. Knox showed up, not as the boy who had left, but as the man who had learned what loss felt like. And Ivy, for the first time, allowed herself to believe in him again. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and ivy, Knox reached for her hand. I'm not asking for the past back, he said, voice steady. I just want whatever future you'll let me have. Ivy didn't answer right away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the warmth, the quiet certainty in his touch. And for the first time in 30 years, she didn't pull away. Years ago, their love had shattered. But now, after everything, after the pain, the loss, and the healing, they had built something stronger. One crisp autumn morning, Lily came home for the holidays to find her mother and father sitting on the porch together, hands entwined, sharing quiet laughter. She didn't need an explanation. She simply smiled, sat beside them, and reached out, linking her arm through Knox's on one side and Ivy's on the other. For the first time, they weren't just fragments of something broken. They were whole. A family, not perfect, not without scars, but whole. And sometimes, that was enough. Love is not always perfect. It is messy, complicated, and sometimes, painfully uncertain. There are moments of heartbreak, of regret, of choices that feel irreversible. But love, true love, is not just about never making mistakes. It is about learning from them. Knox and Ivy lost each other once, not because they didn't love enough, but because they weren't ready to fight for it. They had to grow, to break, to rebuild themselves before they could find their way back. Because sometimes, we have to lose something to understand its worth. And sometimes, the greatest love stories are not the ones that never falter, but the ones that survive.